Welcome to the Droid Devcast, a podcast brought to you by the team at Esper, bringing you the latest news, thoughtful discussion, and insights into all things Android, Android DevOps, and open source software development. I'm your host, Rin Oliver, platform evangelist at Esper, and today I'm joined by Adam Schoenfeld, VP of Strategy at Drift, and the host of the Built in Seattle podcast. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Rin. It's good to be here.
You're very welcome. We're here this week to learn a little bit more about Adam's journey as an entrepreneur and to get his observations on technology behavior and, of course, tech startup observations. Let's get started. Adam, tell me a little bit about you. What have you done and what are you working on currently?
Yeah, I've been a 3-time founder with various levels of success, and most recently co-founder of a company called SiftRock that was a bootstrapped company in the email marketing space, and I sold that to Drift. And Drift is in the conversational marketing space where we have a chat and chatbot product that's been really popular, and I've joined there as a VP of strategy and products. And so I work on the product strategy and roadmap, as well as lead kind of our newer product lines, which is serving sales users. So I've been at Drift for about 2 years. And, before that, I spent a lot of years trying and failing and doing some things good and some bad in starting companies.
That's actually really interesting. Some things good and some things bad is kind of the general antithesis of what makes a startup. I would think some fail, some don't. What would you say is something that you've learned from the ones that failed?
Oh man, so much. I think that having a good relationship with outcomes is important in doing startups because the math is against you. The odds are that you will fail. And so, early on, like when I first started a company, I just thought that my ideas were great. And, because I'd read TechCrunch, that the company would be amazing. But I quickly realized that it wasn't about generating ideas, that it had to be close to the customer. I think that was the lesson from my first startup is the need to have a customer and to really deeply understand the customer and solve for that customer. I had a lot of creative energy, but I had no sense. I had no common sense about what it takes to create value in a business. And so that company ended up shutting down. And I took that lesson forward to my next company, which was a roller coaster of a ride and had some really good high points as well as some lows. But in that company, I took the lesson about focusing on customers and brought it, to the forefront of how I worked. And in the second company, I think the big lesson was about people. And I think that I still believed through that journey that ideas and execution were paramount. And I think what I came away from that learning was that it's all about people, not just who you hire, but how you work as a team, and how you build culture, and all the people decisions ended up being, when I looked back, the most important. Including the relationships with co-founders, the formation of the leadership team. So all those things became, really front and center for me after the second company. After the third company, I'm still, honestly, I'm digesting the learnings from SiftRock. I think it was a great business and we did a lot right. But sometimes probably we underestimated our potential. So I think having a good balance between conviction and humility was probably the thing that I'm still trying to process from the third one. And, it's funny because you look back on history and you create all these narratives. And I think the narratives are constantly changing, even though the facts of the situation didn't change. So I look back on all the experiences now with what I've learned, and it keeps changing. Like my takeaways continue to evolve, which has kind of been interesting.
That does sound really interesting. I agree that it's all about people. I have a lot of thoughts about culture and culture fit and all of those things that I don't think we have time for today, fortunately. That's another podcast. But speaking of podcasting, you're well known for the Built in Seattle podcast. What are some of the most memorable advice that you've gotten from Seattle founders? What have you learned from fellow founders in Seattle?
Yeah, it's been a fun project I've done for about a year now, where I interview entrepreneurs, investors, executives at startups in Seattle. The reason I did it in Seattle, this is funny, is because I just wanted an excuse to get out of the building and go meet with people in person. And so all my early episodes, I was coming to people's offices and recording, in person. Of course, that changed with the pandemic, but I've continued to find value in having those kinds of conversations. And I've been very fortunate to have access to some of the top leaders. I've interviewed, I think, four founders of companies that are worth over $1 billion. I've interviewed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an incredible group of folks. Some of the top investors, including like Matt McElwain of Madrona, and then a lot of the up and coming companies that have raised 20, 30, 40, $50 million and are sort of in that middle range, like CrowdCow or UserMind or Esper, right? I talked to Yadu, your CEO, and I think in terms of the lessons, I could give you a long list, so you can stop me or you can prompt me to go more. But one of the ones that really stood out was I think a lot of the really successful people have a more nuanced view on humility than I have had in my life. It's not that they just say, I'm not so great. It's that they really go deep into learning from others. They're really good at inquiry. They sort of destroy their own ideas, as Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett talk about. And they're good at listening and learning quickly. So I've sort of realized that, they have this more advanced view of humility, I guess. I was surprised that none of them come across like, well, I'm so successful. I run $1 billion company. So I'm in a different class of people. So you should treat me differently, or I'm some special person. None of them have that mindset, right? They're all continuing to learn, continuing to push themselves and challenge their ideas, to listen and to learn from others. So I found that to be really eye-opening in kind of how they thought about, humility, how they assess their own ideas, and how they kind of learn from others. That's probably been the biggest. A smaller one, but related, is I think most of them see time differently. They kind of have an infinite horizon. So they, play the infinite game, if you're familiar with, finite versus infinite games. And the really successful people are doing this for 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 years before they really become known as a successful company. And so the company builders and founders that are coming in early, they're able to take that very, very long-term view. And I think that, they're able to really put that above any sort of short-term or finite games that they're playing in how they operate and how they make choices all along the way.
I agree completely. In writing, we actually call that ability kill your darlings. If you love something, you can delete it. If it doesn't further the story forward, you just get rid of it. It's okay, because you have to accept that even though you think something's perfect, your reader won't.
I love that.
And you have to be able to have that. You have to be able to have your hubris and say, this is not serving the story. It's not moving things forward, so it needs to be cut. So I think that having the capability to sit back and say, this isn't working, what can we do better?
Yeah. It's hard though, right? Because we fall in love with our own ideas.
Yeah.
It's like the Richard Feynman quote, right? Like the first principle is not to fool yourself, but you're the easiest person to fool. And I think that that's so true. And we fall in love with our own ideas, and we kind of get stuck in that pattern.
Too true. What are some startups and emerging technologies that you're really excited about that are coming out now?
I love the no-code, low-code space. I'm an investor in a fund in that space. I think that's really exciting, what you can do with no code and low code now. I still love marketing tech. I mean, I've been working in marketing tech for a long time, and investors I think a lot of them hate marketing tech because there's, 7,000 or 8,000 different vendors playing in the space. But I think that's one of the reasons I love it, because there's still a lot of unsolved problems. And I don't know that it's really cemented in terms of the CMO's kind of top 3 must-haves yet. I think that's still very fluid. And, certainly Drift wants to be there. And I think has a great chance to, and is, certainly proving that in our current stage of the business. But I still think there's lots of opportunity in marketing tech and different parts of marketing tech. So those are the ones that I'm, probably thinking about the most right now.
Absolutely. And in terms of marketing tech, what's a tool that's come out recently that you're just like, this is going to change things? Are there any?
In marketing tech specifically? I don't know. I think that's the problem with the space. I think, I don't want to toot Drift's horn, but I think we, and the founders of Drift very early, identified a really big trend to latch onto. But, I haven't seen a lot lately that I'm like, this is changing the game. I think a lot of it's pretty incremental. And that's one of the things I like about the space is there's still a lot of opportunity there. I think this whole virtual events thing is going to really change marketing tech. I don't think anybody's nailed that yet.
Oh, for sure. No, not even close.
Uh,
No, that's a long game for sure.
yeah, so that's one that will be like an interesting sub segment. I still think email is like really interesting. Like, I mean, everybody needs email, and there's continues to be good innovation in email marketing. But I don't know. It hasn't really had like a second wave or a third wave. Maybe is the right way of thinking about it. But I still think email is important. I think like watching what Segment was able to do with their customer data platform was really compelling, and they just got bought for a huge number. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 or whatever billion by or 1 billion, but it was a huge outcome, and I'm blanking on the number. But by Twilio, they got bought by Twilio, and so I think this whole data space is still like nascent. I think the whole CDP layer is kind of undefined. So yeah, nothing. It's funny. Like I should have an answer of something that's like caught my eye as changing the game, but I haven't seen that. I think it's a lot of incremental stuff, and companies are still piecing together 15 or 20 vendors usually.
In terms of virtual events, actually, this is something that I'm lucky my background has actually prepared me for because I have a background in the games and esports industry from way back. And so I feel like the people that are now in DevRel and now in community that may also share that background are in a little bit of a better position just because esports are up until recently were by and large pre-recorded virtually and you had to have that virtual aspect. So it's one of those things where it's like, did not think those would intersect, but now they have.
Yeah, yeah. What a funny meeting of your different domains, right? Between marketing
Yeah.
and esports. That's one of those combos where you kind of get this unusual edge from combining two different things.
Exactly, exactly. I thought it was very interesting. And based on your experience, do you have any advice to founders or potential founders that are hoping to get into maybe starting their own startup?
Oh man, I think I'm not great at dispensing advice. I think I'm a middle of the road at best in my track record. So, but certainly trying to learn as I go. I think the advice that I would give a founder who's thinking about it, or maybe myself before I had gotten into this crazy mess, I'd probably say think of the pursuit as the prize, right? Think of the climb up the mountain as the reward rather than the top, because the relationship you have to outcomes is so important, because of the odds, because how hard it is. And so if you're only focused on some external reward, then it's probably going to suck a lot along the way. And even if you win, then you're going to get the reward, and it's probably still going to not feel any better. So I like to think about, am I doing a good thing? When I interviewed Glenn Kelman, and I asked him about his hard days, he said when he goes home to his partner and he talks about the hard times, and she asks him like, are you doing a good thing? And he's like, yeah, absolutely, we're doing a good thing, right? And it's kind of like grounding and stuff like that. Or I like to think of, would I be proud of this if it failed, or would I still do it if it failed? And I think if you can't come up with answers to those things, and it's all about some kind of external prize, it's going to be really rough. I think I like to think of like the grandma test, just like, would my grandma think this is a good thing worth doing? It doesn't have to be solving some, environmental problem or curing cancer, but, it has to be something that you feel is like a net positive for someone else in the world. And you can usually affect your customers and your employees, even on a small scale. So that's probably what I would advise too. And I do do give a flavor of that advice when people call me about it too. People who are thinking about starting a company, is to kind of get clear on why you're doing it, and, kind of inspect or interrogate the relationship you have with your outcomes.
Absolutely. I actually also have a growing small business with my wife, and we've noticed that there's a few parallels in what you just said between having a small business and being at a startup. I think it's interesting because there is that "are we doing something worthwhile" test happening a lot, and the journey itself has been really interesting. And I think that there's a lot of parallels, especially in e-commerce, to startups too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true in any creative or entrepreneurial pursuit, because it's hard to go against the grain, and it's hard to break out from the consensus or the conventions. And so, if you think in terms of the pursuit and the process and take that as the reward, I think you have an advantage over people who think about the outcome only. It lets you be more fluid and flexible in sort of how you go about it, and, stay focused on your values and how you want to be, rather than just playing to win or get some prize.
Absolutely. And for those students of startups that we've heard of, what does it mean in your experience to be a student of a startup? What's that all? What's that like?
Oh, okay. I know. I'll tell you the origin of it. I got that from, there's an analyst I really like, guy named by the name of Dan Gottlieb at Topo. And I remember hearing him saying, I try to be a student of the game at all times. And I was like, oh, that's a great way of saying what you do. And I think I try to be a student of startups or a student of business. I try to, learn about businesses, what makes them work, what makes them tick, from this time, as well as I try to get outside of this time period and outside of this domain as well, and look at, Danny Meyer in the restaurant space, or look at just people and how they succeed and what makes them tick. And so, yeah, I try to just act like a student in terms of trying to learn and understand the reality of businesses and startups.
Absolutely. And given the current situation that we're in, people might not find themselves with a lot of time to learn. They may be experiencing burnout especially if they're already out of startup. Startup life is hard. What would you say to those people to find the time to be a student? What are some tools that you recommend to help people prioritize that whole work-life balance thing, especially in the current pandemic situation?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I think the lines have gotten very blurred. At least I have young kids. So in my house, it's like there is no line. They could run in here at any time and start screaming. And plus, yeah, you don't have that commute or that sort of distance that gets created. Yeah, it's a tough time, I think, in a lot of ways. I think we have to give ourselves some grace, right? I think that it's okay not to really achieve the most possible during this current time. I think having some grace and some space is really important. At least I'm trying to do that with myself and not drive myself to the max at all times. But with learning, I mean, for me, learning gives me energy. So it's kind of on the other side of the ledger, right? Like if I have time to read, if I have time to listen to great interviews, if I have time to, learn from others, that's giving me energy. So I think that's probably for me personally, one component of it is that's sort of the time I have to re-energize. And then I would say to the extent you can integrate it into your work, that's the highest leverage, because at least for me, I found that learning is great in concept, but the rubber hits the road on practice and how you integrate principles into what you do. So if I can get reps and sets on something bigger that I'm thinking about or working on or learning about in my day-to-day work or day-to-day life as a parent or a spouse or whatever roles I had played during a pandemic, then I think that's where a lot of leverage comes, because so much of learning is like practice, reps and sets, trying and failing, experimentation. So I think bringing that in, even in a very small way, is probably the most bang for the buck kind of opportunity.
Absolutely, I agree completely. In reference to your current role, how have you seen the state of self-service evolve since the onset of COVID?
Oh wow, yeah, a lot more digital. I think whether it's full self-service, product-led growth, or whether it's just people, getting educated on a company or engaging with a company digitally, it's just way more, right? Like we just talked about virtual events, right? We don't have events. So in our world, in B2B, it's like events were a huge thing, and you'd meet people at this conference or that conference. And, if you're a field sales rep, you would fly in and you'd take them out to dinner, and like all those activities are gone. And so I think the focus is just more and more on digital marketing, digital experience, and whether that be self-serve or assisted, that's where most companies are, I think, spending their time. I don't know how to quantify it, but it went from a mix between the two to entirely digital. And I don't know how much it swings back, but certainly right now, if you're not, building your sales and marketing systems around digital, you're going to be missing out on a lot.
Absolutely, I agree completely. Definitely building digital events is something that we're going to be focusing on next year at Esper a little bit too. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you do. I'm still waiting for one to really just, define the model and be like, this is how it's done. And this is a great virtual experience. It's so hard to replicate some of the goodness that you get from showing up in a Zoom type environment.
Yeah, I've been to so many KubeCons, and there's KubeCon North America virtual this week, and they're not the same. They're not the same at all, and it bums me out.
Yeah. Do you miss them? Do you miss the events?
Yeah. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I can't even put into words how much I miss KubeCon because I've spoken at them and I've also just not only was I a speaker, but I've also been a pod mentor and I've done so much in the Kubernetes community and I've gotten so much back. And being involved in the Kubernetes community is something that's absolutely changed my life. And I miss all my friends, and that's like it's hard. It's hard not to see the people that you've gotten to know over the last 2 years that have been there throughout the highs and lows of your career and that have helped you grow as a person. And yeah, I miss that.
I think that's a great observation because so much of it is about that community and that multi-turn, relationship that you have with people there. Some people go to events in a very transactional way, like I'm going to try to get business or I'm going to try to run a booth and leave. But like what you're talking about is I'm the same way. Like the events that I go to, it's because I've gone to them multiple times and like I know I'm going to see certain people there, and it's like it's going to be fun and enriching in sort of a long-term way, and that's really hard to replicate in a like virtual room.
It's very hard. Yeah. I hope we get to do KubeCon in person next year. That'd be good. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Let's bring the vaccines, right?
Yeah. I know, right? Pfizer, please. Yeah. Lastly, what gives you hope for the future of startups? What's the thing that you're really holding on to in terms of the startups that are going to go places in the future?
I think looking at my kids gives me hope for the future because despite all that's going on in the world, they still ask great questions. They're curious. They're much more curious than any adults I know. And that's what it's all about. And I think that, they're going to get through this. They're incredibly resilient and we'll all get through this. And, I think we'll keep innovating. We'll keep being creative. So I think these are like tough times for a lot of people, and I don't want to discount that. And I recognize I'm also in a place of extreme privilege that my company's doing well and that I have a job and, that I have a yard where my kids can go run around so that, they can get still actually have things to do that aren't just looking at an iPad. But I think we will get through this, and like creativity and innovation will continue as it has. And I think a lot of good companies will get founded in this too, because, we've been talking about just this one problem, virtual events, but extrapolate that out to like, education and healthcare and everything else in the world that is just under intense pressure right now. And I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting companies that probably come out in the next 2-3 years.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rin. Yeah, I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Droid Devcast. We'll be back next week with another exciting show for you. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode on social media. You can also follow us on Twitter at @EsperDev and subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with all the latest happenings here at Esper. You can listen to the Droid Devcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Simplecast, wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you again for listening.